Hi, and welcome to another edition of Libertarian Alternative, the Libertarian Party's show to educate you on what the Libertarian Party stands for. I'm Dusty Taylor.
And I'm Dave Ruprecht. I'm the Executive Director of the California Libertarian Party.
There you go. We have both of us on the show. And we also have the president of the Reason Foundation, David Knott. How are you, David?
Good, thank you.
Good, good. What do you do as the president of Reason Foundation?
Well, I joke I don't do anything because I'm president, but I'm responsible for raising funds for the organization and setting the direction and working with the board.
Tell us what the Reason Foundation is.
We publish Reason Magazine, which is the magazine of free minds and free markets. And we also produce public policy research that's relevant in Washington, D.C. and in states and counties around the country.
How long have you been around?
Reason was founded in 1968. The magazine was started by a Boston University or Boston College student who ran the magazine from his dorm room.
Of course.
And then it's grown from there. And then as we saw that there was a market for our public policy work, we added that, incorporated, and grown to where Reason Foundation is the organization it is today.
And it has really grown. We're actually taping here from the Reason Foundation in Los Angeles, a big office building, lots of people working in their office with writing papers, doing research on lots of the public policy that's going on in the United States. We really appreciate your work on that. And if you want to know more about the Reason Foundation, you can go to reason.org and find out. I guess it's new and improved. Your website is now new and improved.
New and improved.
Reason.org. Well, we have you on the show today to talk about something very controversial, and that is the drug war in the United States. And people are well divided on what we should be doing about drugs in the United States. What is it that you're finding about the drug policy in the United States?
Well, I've found a lot of things, but it really starts with my personal journey. And I grew up in a very conservative town, very conservative home, and really thought that drugs were awful. And then I began reading about the subject, and I started to really question whether the drug war might be doing more harm than the drugs themselves would do. But then it was when my wife was pregnant with our first child that we went to Lamaze class, and they asked us to line up for how much pain medication or how that we wanted for during the pregnancy. And me being very committed to not taking any foreign substances into your body, I lined up that natural childbirth would be a wonderful thing.
Naturally, the guys do that, right?
Well, and that's what happened. The guys in the Lamaze class went toward the natural, and my wife lined up with "Give me the epidural" in the parking lot.
Yeah, really. About 3 months before I had given birth.
Exactly. But it really made me look at my own views about drugs and to realize that childbirth is very violent. The natural way is for women to die in childbirth, and that drugs have actually been terrifically helpful for making human life better off. And so it made me look at my own preconceptions and really start to ask, what about drugs as tools? And why do we have such a phobia when 2/3 of Americans or some huge percentage take antidepressants? I mean, drugs are very prominent, very prevalent in our society. So really it becomes a question of, well, what drugs for what purposes, and why are some illegal and why are some legal? And so that's how I got into this whole question.
But there's a huge difference between so-called ethical drugs, the antidepressants or prescription drugs, and the ones that are illegal.
Narcotics. The narcotics.
Well, yeah. Is marijuana considered a narcotic? I know it's actually I think it's right up there with heroin.
Well, there is a pain relief effect from cannabis that's been demonstrated, and it's coming more and more to light in the literature. But it's not generally considered in the opiates, which are the morphines, the heroines that are really useful for pain relief in medicine. They use for after surgery and such things. So I don't think they think of marijuana as a narcotic.
I see. But there is really two big issues here when we're talking about the drug war. We're talking about people's ability to choose what their quality of life is. Now, my quality of life is not to drink and drive and to only have a cocktail maybe once or twice a month kind of thing. I know people that have a quality of life that they have 2 or 3 cocktails every night that they get home, or they go out to dinner every day,
right,
or they play soccer on the weekends. For them, that's their quality of life, and they're free to choose that.
Correct.
So where do we draw the line? What is your research finding out about where we draw the line and why we've drawn the line to what drugs like alcohol is acceptable and what drugs like cannabis or even other more substantive, addictive,
Cocaine.
Right. Well, you make a good point. If we separate the pharmaceutical drugs and limit ourselves to those that people often view as recreational, so alcohol, tobacco, marijuana, the opiates, the hallucinogens, cocaine, and just look at those classes of substances, I think the question you're asking is, why have we drawn the line where we have?
Yeah, exactly.
Some of the historical reasons for that include the opium laws. Originally were, there are memos from the president that were an effort to get our hands into China and influence them in our foreign policy. And in order for us to influence their opium production and consumption, we had to have laws here in this country. So those are some of the earliest drug laws, and they were used to advance U.S. interests.
And not anything to do with health and welfare of our citizens, is that right?
Well, when things get justified politically, there are all sorts, you end up having political coalitions to advance any issue. So if you look at the currently illegal drugs, you have several forces, it seems to me, that are behind why we have these laws. You have the same forces that brought us alcohol prohibition, which is the temperance movement and the general disapproval of intoxication in this country. And that goes back to our religious roots, kind of our Puritan existence of where we started.
Right.
And that's one, I think, part of the drug war. There is another part in that there are fears of addiction and fears of harm, and so people don't want their children to be caught in the throes of drugs and to then have sex with jazz musicians. I mean, this was the these
You've
were
been listening to my parents, haven't
well,
you?
there's a New York Times piece I stumbled across fairly recently from 50 or 60 years ago, and it presents this case that
Rock and roll was the same way.
beware of what could happen, of what the drugs will do to these people. But that mythology of the power of drugs really persists to this day, with something like the Rodney King the beating, the video of the beating, where they show him as superhuman strength, and drugs are really given this power that is, I think, exaggerated, but it plays to people's fears. And the fear of the heroin addict lying in the gutter is a very real driver in setting public policy in this country. And I think another significant part of why we have the drug war was really brought to light to me by a woman who lives in South Florida. And she was on the South Florida Drug Commission in 1971. She's a real estate developer, very prominent in the community, and she said, well, so I got invited to the commission, took this very seriously, and I read everything I could, and I concluded that if drugs are a problem, then we should focus on the problem and focus on treatment and taking care of the problems that we have with drugs. And she then said she went to the first meeting and she realized that the decisions had all been made before the meeting ever happened, and that law enforcement viewed the drug war in South Florida as a way to expand its franchise and to expand its business by having more business, more crimes to pursue. And for prosecutors, it's far easier to find somebody with drugs in their possession and to get a successful prosecution than it is, say, to catch them breaking into somebody's house. And so it's a useful tool for law enforcement, that if they suspect somebody of doing something else or of being a bad person, very often having the drug crime is a useful tool for them to remove them from circulation or to get them off of the street. So you have many forces combined to give us the drug war that we have today. And I would put that as disapproval of pleasure and intoxication, fear of the